Like I said in my short review, this movie isn't very good. It's not the worst thing ever, but it still doesn't really do anything. So before I talk about this film, I just want to talk about the original quickly. I remember really enjoying it at the time, but I do think now it was kind of overhyped. Like, it really shouldn't have garnered the controversy it did. There are some good moments, like obviously the soundtrack, Joaquin Phoenix, the sort of world building it does, that's good. But at the same time, the fact everyone is so mean-spirited, the made-up girlfriend Arthur has with his neighbour didn't really need to happen. You could have cut out the story altogether. And the supposed implication that Arthur and Bruce Wayne are half brothers didn't really go anywhere. Like, you know, they set it up, but ultimately they didn't do anything with it. But yeah, despite its flaws, it's a good watch. Like, it's an okay watch, but I do think it's quite overrated. This movie, on the other hand, I don't really understand what Todd Phillips was trying to accomplish. Like I said, this doesn't really say anything. It's like one big epilogue to something that's happened in the original. There are positives with this film, and I will go over that quickly. So, the opening act is good. It starts with a Looney Tunes style animation, which is an interesting way to start a film and does make sense in the context of Arthur's character. The opening, when we do reach Arkham Asylum, is really good. You know, when we're introduced to Arthur, we see how the asylum runs. That's really well made. The use of colour is still really great. The sort of very dreary and muted colours really do add to Arkham Asylum, and sort of shows how dreary and depressing this world is. And obviously Joaquin Phoenix still does a great job as Arthur Fleck. He goes back into the character so well, like that. He's still great in this role. Yeah, aside from that, those are mainly the only positives I can say. I keep going back to this, but this movie doesn't really have anything to say. I think the biggest thing you can talk about this is it's a musical, and that's what makes this diverse to not only the original but other Todd Phillips sequels he's done, mainly Hangover 2 and 3. Hangover 2 was the exact same, and Hangover 3 was such a departure, like in terms of the genre, how it was basically a crime thriller as opposed to comedy. But it does kind of go into why it's a musical. They sort of explain how you can become happy and you can become content with yourself through music. So it kind of explains why it's a musical. But they don't really go into it very much. Like, it doesn't really have much choreography that you'd expect from a musical. It doesn't really have any of the things you could see in the musical, and that's something that I feel they could have toyed with. They could have done a really good idea. You know, have the sort of choreography, the music, the cinematography of something like a musical you'd see from the 40s or 50s. But they don't really delve in that direction. So Lady Gaga is Harley Quinn in this movie, but they don't call her Harley Quinn, they call her Lee throughout. Instead of being the character that she was known for, being like a psychotherapist working at the asylum, she's an inmate. And she falls in love with Arthur, and Arthur falls in love with her very quickly. There isn't really much for development for their relationship, and that's sort of like they really could have like delved into what makes them different, what makes them really stand out, what makes them, like, you know, actually love each other, as opposed to we need to do it because the script sort of demands it. But most of this film takes place in the courthouse because there's a trial that Arthur goes through, see if he's guilty for the events of the original. Most of the film is based on the trial, and is basically one big recap of the situations and the characters. A few of the characters come back, and recounting the events, it's kind of like, it just kind of feels there. It's like, well, I've said this before, it's sort of like one big member berries. It's like, oh, do you remember this that happened? Do you remember that happened? Do you remember when Arthur did this? Do you remember when Arthur did that? And there are moments where scenes from that movie sort of intercut, and, well, it's very much like, do you remember this? Oh, do you remember this? Going back to the musicals, like the whole musical aspect does sort of work, like, because it's in their head and it's not like a traditional musical where you have everyone dancing, everyone singing. It kind of makes sense that it's in their mind, so it's sort of like, so the music, in a sense, non-diegetic to Arthur and Harley Quinn, and that's an aspect that I think is pretty good. Yeah, this movie isn't terrible, it's not awful, it's not a dumpster fire that so many people made it out to be. It's just kind of pointless at the end of the day. Like, you had the original, I mean, despite its flaws, it had a good ending, like, it was a good standalone movie, but this film, in a way, it sort of wants to capitalise on that and be like, what else can we do with these characters? It really could have worked if they thought about it more and they thought about, okay, how can we properly make this work? But they sort of went in such a unique direction, it just kind of makes it sort of ineffective. Plus the sort of bizarre ending that happens where something drastic happens, and then something else happens, and then something else happens, which it sort of leaves you thinking, why was that there? Like, you could have cut out those segments, and I think the ending result still could have been the same. Like, the very end could have been the same had it not been for that twist. This movie, like, I mean, like I said, this movie isn't atrocious, it's just boring and ineffective. You know, when it's out on streaming, I say check it out. It's something that you sort of need to see, but not necessarily pay a cinema ticket for. It's something to see based on how it's unique and how different it is. But as a movie, it does okay in terms of structure and like the basic cinematography and like colour grading. It's fine on that. But character-wise, story structure, it doesn't really do much and kind of fails in that department. But yeah, that's my review of Joker 2. Hope you enjoy it. Hope like and subscribe, and I'll see you later.